Hi, and welcome to another episode of Reinventing Your Home. My name is Ross, and in this week's video we're making these handleless kitchen cabinets. So join me the next half an hour to see how we did that. For those of you who stayed to the end of this video, I will tell you the exact cost of this project, and you would also be able to see the hidden drawer that we've incorporated. Hope you enjoy it. On this particular project, I've decided to make the top cabinets first. Really doesn't matter what order you start with because it's two separate pieces, so it only matters when you start fitting them. But as you can see here, I've had my pieces of plywood pre-cut strips. I had them done in the store, and what I'm doing is the cross cuts on the miter saw. It turns out my miter saw had the capacity to do the cross cuts, so it was easier for me that way. And then once this was done, I would go over with a bit of sandpaper and clear up those edges so I don't get any splinters in my fingers. Then we run it on the table saw to make sure all of our pieces are exactly the same width, followed by creating the groove for the back with a router. Then it was a case of drilling a whole lot of pocket holes. So the first thing here, we're drilling the pocket holes which are intended to hold our face frame. As you can see, this is facing forward. And then we do these ones on the bottom of the piece, which are intended to hold the cabinet together without having any visible screws, because the bottom panel of that cabinet is going to be seen, so we don't want to screw through it. Instead, we want to do that, and we hide those pocket holes with a side panel. And this is the aforementioned bottom panel, of which the front edge would also be seen. And this is why we're going over and edge banding it with an appropriate edging strip. So this is a maple plywood, so we're having maple edging strip to match it, because once the doors are open we will be able to see that. And then the next step would be to create our jig for the shelf pins. So I've spoken in previous videos that whenever I have to repeatedly drill holes for shelf pins, I would create a sacrificial jig that I would use for this particular project, and then after that I'll throw it away. So this is exactly what I'm doing here. As you can see, I'm marking the position for all the holes. Then I would take it to the drill press and drill all of the holes. It has to be done on the drill press because it's 90 degrees compared to the piece, and then we'd use that as a reference. This is a piece of birch ply. I think it was 24mm birch ply that I had laying around, not really used for anything. And then the next step is, as you can see here, I've cut it to exactly the same length as my pieces, so I just have to align it and then drill all of my holes. So in here I had to align it with the back edge of the groove for the back. So that's the bit tricky. You have to remember that, otherwise your shelf pins would end up where the back is supposed to be. But other than that, it's pretty simple. Then it was time to deal with the middle panel. So normally on that middle panel we would screw it from the top and the bottom. However, as I've mentioned before, that bottom panel would be seen, so I do not want to have any visible screws. So what I'm doing here instead is I'm drilling some holes for a bunch of dowels. As you can see, I'm using this jig which is designed for dowels, and the main purpose of it is so your hole is perpendicular to the piece. Then we transfer those markings onto the actual piece and do exactly the same thing. We drill our corresponding holes. One thing you have to remember with this one is we have to drill a deeper hole on this piece because we can do that. On the flat surface we have to be very careful because I don't want to have visible screws, and I also don't want to have a visible hole. So you'd have to be super careful not to go through the entire piece. Here you can't really do that. As you can see, you're going against the grain, so you can drill the hole as deep as you want. So on this side is slightly deeper, and then on the flat face is a lot shallower. After that it was time to assemble the unit. As you can see here, we're putting some glue on the dowels, putting them in the holes, and then I would run a bead of glue on the sides here. Now normally I would try and avoid gluing my cabinets because it's not really necessary if you build them right. It doesn't really need any reinforcing. However, on these ones, because they were held by pocket holes, I thought it wouldn't hurt. So as you can see here, I've attached one piece, then I would slide the back, put the middle divider, and then in a second you will actually see how the pocket holes are holding it together. So I'm running a bead of wood glue here, and then as I put the piece, we have the pocket holes facing downwards, as you can see here. Again, I've designed these units so we'd have an end panel which would cover all of those pocket holes. So we're screwing them together like that, and then after that it's just a case of putting the top. On the top we can screw through it because none of that is going to be seen. So that was the beauty of it. I can pin it with my nail gun as I normally do with cabinets, and then go over with some screws and then screw it together. Now, one thing you have to remember at this stage is to keep checking it's square, it's aligning properly, because we're here at the point where we can make some adjustments. What you don't want to do is you don't want to screw it and fix it and have it all together just to realize that it's out of alignment. And then the next thing I do, because it was towards the end of the day, so just before I left the workshop, I put it on the clamps. So normally you don't need to put cabinets like that on the clamps. However, here the only reason is so we can put that dowel joint together and have that glue set overnight. So I left it like that, and then I came back the next day to continue with the build. So back in the workshop the following day, the first thing I had to do is cut the shelves for our cabinet. You know, the ones that we drill the pinholes for. First thing is we cut the length, then we take it to the table and cut the width of it. So I use a very simple formula here. The width, it's up to you how wide you want to cut the shelf. It shouldn't be narrower than the pins because otherwise it's kind of pointless. But the length of it, I usually take the internal dimension of the cabinet, and then I would just take off 2 millimeters off it. That usually gives us a nice and snug fit. And once this was done, we edge band the front edge because that's the seam one, and then we have all of the shelves, as you can see here. Then following that, we have to cut the brackets with which we're going to mount the cabinet to the wall. So I like to use the French cleat method for those brackets. As you can see here, I'm cutting this piece at a 45-degree angle on the table, so, and then I would mount one set of bracket onto the cabinet here, and then the other one would be cut slightly shorter. The corresponding one we cut slightly shorter, which I would use to mount on the wall. So the reason I cut it slightly shorter is so I can have some wiggle room. As you can see here, that will allow me to slide the cabinet left and right. Then I would also install a bottom mounting plate, and the reason for that is once we have the cabinet hanging onto that 45-degree French cleat that pulls it in together, I would pop a couple of screws through that bottom mounting plate, making sure it's absolutely secure and in no way it can be pulled off the wall. Then the next thing is to cut and assemble our face frame. So for this one we have a slightly unusual face frame, which is kind of like a U shape. So normally we'd have a square. On this one we have a non-existing bottom because the bottom of the face frame would be aligning with our doors. And it's an overhang, so we can use that to open the doors. As you can see here, it's quite a simple one. We just connect it with pocket holes through the back. It's a very simple method. I use it on all of my face frame constructions. You don't really need anything more than that. You could mortise and tenon it. You can use any bridle joints. You can use a festool domino if you have one. Not really need it. Then what I did was I would just break the edges here with my little block plane. You can do that with a router if you have one that's set up. It's probably even better because that way you can make sure that all of your chamfers are exactly the same. But again, I like to use my block plane every once in a while. And the next thing is to attach the face frame onto the cabinets here. So as you can see, we have a slight overhang, and the intention here is for our doors to align with that overhang on the face frame. And that lip is where you would use to open the doors. Then we use our pocket holes that we've drilled previously on the side and the top to attach our face frame. As you can see here, our face frame is wider than the cabinet by about the thickness of our end panel, which is not by accident. So the intention here is to butt the end panel onto it and we can have a flush cabinet which aligns with the overhang of the face frame. Then the next thing is we have to cut and make the doors. So the doors are just plain flat doors made out of MDF. And here's a little trick for you. So when it comes to painting MDF, what a lot of people get wrong very often is not preparing those edges properly. So this is the most tricky thing when it comes to painting MDF. So what I like to do is I like to sand them. As a bare MDF, I like to sand them with 80 grit sandpaper. That removes any saw marks and it gives you a better finish. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't sand them in between coats. You still should. However, that initial sand with 80 grit sandpaper, it does provide you with a better finish. After that, I went over the router to put a little chamfer. And then once the door is prepped and cut to size, we can go ahead and mark the position for the hinges. Then drill our 35mm holes. So as you can see, these are quite small doors, so I just took them to the drill press. However, you can use a normal cordless drill. You do not have to have a drill press or a fancy jig for that matter. A normal cordless drill will be just fine. The next step is we offer the hinge. We use a square to make sure that it's aligning properly. That way we can mark the position for our screws, drill our pilot holes and attach the hinge. Then we can actually go ahead and hang the door onto the cabinet. So the thing I like to do here is I would use a little bit of offcut of MDF that I have laying around, and I will create a sacrificial jig. Kind of like what I did with the shelf pins, but instead what I would do, I would put a hinge onto it, and that way I can mark the position of the screws for my mounting plate. That way I can avoid drilling the holes in the wrong place and potentially ruin my cabinet. So I would do that. Then I can mark the position of the screws, drill pilot holes, attach my little mounting plates, and then after that I can just clip the hinges together. So those are very simple inset hinges, very nice to use. I got them from Amazon, I believe, because for some reason they're very expensive if you want to buy them straight from the shop. And this is the cabinet ready for painting. So once this was done, we can go ahead and start working on the bottom units. So first thing is you have to get a charged battery, because my soul would refuse to work without one. Anyways, so we spend the next couple of hours cutting up the pieces for our base units. So on our base units we have a cabinet and a recess for a tumble dryer. The cabinet has a single door, and because the doors are handleless, we have to create a kind of a different cabinet. So these are the pieces I'm cutting for that. You'll see that in a minute. I can't even explain that. It's I don't even know what to call it. The door has on the top of the door we have a 40-degree angle that allows us to open it, and it's just a strip of plywood that covers it. Covers it? I don't know. I don't even know how to explain it. You will see that in a second. And then the next thing is we keep cutting up the pieces. Once we have everything to size, it's time to drill our pocket holes. As I've explained in previous videos, and I may have even mentioned that in this one, whenever you have to attach a face frame and using pocket holes to do that, it's easier to drill the pocket holes once the cabinet is in pieces before you assemble it. You can do that at a later stage, just easier to do that now. Then the next step is to drill our shelf pins. So in here I was able to repurpose the same jig I used for the top cabinets. On this one we only had a couple of sides that needed to be drilled, as opposed to the 4 sides on the top cabinets. That way it didn't make any sense for me to make a new one, so I was repurposing the old one. One thing you have to remember at this stage is you have to account for the thickness of the back, because if you don't, your shelf pins might not be equally spaced, which is annoying. And then the next step is we have to edge band the front edge of our bottom piece, because once again we're having a U-shaped face frame. What that means is that once you open the door, that edge would be seen. Then the next thing, just before we start assembling the units, is we have to attach the mounting plates for the legs. So what I like to do here is I would offset them at the same distance. I think I'm using 50mm. Normally you do that so your kickboard would be equally spaced, because you have to remember most of the times when you're attaching kickboard, it's attached with clips to those plastic legs. In this case it was slightly different. You will see in a minute why. However, I still like to offset them equally. It's just a nice little touch, even if I don't use the normal method of kickboard that's attaching to the legs. Even if I'm using a baseboard sort of method, I still like to offset them equally. After that, it's a case of assembling the unit, and it's a pretty standard procedure here, as with most of my cabinets. I like to pin them in place with nail gun, then come back and screw them in together. So one thing I like to do on my base units when it comes to kitchens, and mostly any cabinets to be honest with you, is I would use a 3/4 inch back on those ones, because it gives it a lot more stability. So this one, I know it's not going to be carrying a hell of a lot of weight, but nevertheless it's the same principle applies in here. I would do that on most, if not all, of the cabinets I make. Very rarely on base units I would make an exception and use a thinner backing. So a 3/4 inch or 18mm back is perfect, because it gives the cabinet enough stability so it can carry a heavy worktop, and you can put a lot of stuff on top of the worktop and it'll be absolutely fine. And then the next step here is that we can start using those thin strips that we cut earlier for the handleless door. So the first thing is this one, which we'll be using to attach our face frame with the pocket holes that are going to be covered by the worktop, and also we can screw in the worktop from the bottom of the plate. So once we have it clamped in together so it won't be moving, we can go ahead, drill a couple of pilot holes and screw it with a couple of screws on each side, as you can see me doing that here. Then the next step would be to use that thinner strip and attach it like so. Now the point of this one is my idea here was to cut the door slightly shorter than needed and have a 40-degree angle on the top, so you can stick your fingers and then open the door that way. However, what that meant is that you would have a gap for your fingers, and if I didn't put that plate, you essentially would be able to see inside that cabinet even with the door closed. So I didn't want to do that, so I instead opted to have this exposed plywood strip that matches the rest of the cabinet. As I've mentioned previously, on the base units we have a single cabinet and a recess for the tumble dryer. So in order for us to create the recess for the tumble dryer, we need a single end panel that goes on one end. The rest of it would be the cabinet that we've just built. So this is exactly what we're doing here. I've cut the panel to size, and the only thing I need to do in preparation is to attach a piece that matches the face frame. So I'm doing that with pocket holes, being very careful to design it in a way that the pocket holes will be facing the wall and won't be seen. And that's about it in terms of creating the panel. The only thing you have to remember when you're cutting those end panels is that you have to cut them oversized and trim them on site. More often than not, the walls won't be straight and you may need to scribe some bits. You may need to trim it to size on site, so it's easier to cut them slightly oversized and do any final shavings on site. So one thing here I did before painted it was just sanded the face frame just to make sure it's flush with the panel. Then after that we can go ahead and create the face frame for the base unit. So once again we're using the same method here. It's a 3-piece face frame. We won't have a bottom, so that in this case the face frame goes to the floor, as opposed to normally it just ends with the cabinet. In this case it goes down to the floor. Sometimes when you do stuff like that, you may want to consider leaving the face frame slightly longer and possibly trimming it on side once you have the cabinets installed. In this case, because it was a single cabinet and I had measured very well, I did not do that. But if you're building a lot of cabinets in this with this particular method, it probably would be a good idea to leave the face frame slightly longer. Then you can install the cabinets and trim them to size. And after that we can go ahead and attach the face frame to the cabinet using the pocket holes that we've drilled earlier. As you can see them on the side here, we have them on the side, top and bottom. Actually no, correction, we don't have them on the bottom because we do not have a bottom piece. I just got myself lying. But you have to keep in mind we have side panels on both sides, so we can cover those pocket holes. None of them would be seen. I'll see a lot of people nowadays use the lamello system to connect their face frames to the cabinets. Maybe it's a good thing I've not used it. In the meantime, I keep using my pocket hole jig. Then the next step is to create the door. So we cut the MDF on the table saw, and this here is actually what I was telling you about, the 40-degree angle that goes on top. I was mentioning it earlier. It's basically it. It's a simple flat door with a 40-degree angle cut on top. The only thing different is it's slightly shorter, so we can have a gap for our fingers. Hence why we put that thin strip, so you won't be able to see inside the cabinet once the door is closed. But other than that, it's a very simple flat door. So once we're done breaking the edges, sanding it, and just generally prepping it, we can go ahead and mark the position for our hinges. It's exactly the same process as we did with the top ones. We just mark the position here onto the drill press to drill our 35mm holes for the hinges. In case you're wondering, the offset to the center of the hole from the edge of the door is 20mm, and in most cases, or at least most of the concealed hinges I used, have the same offset. However, if you're using them, just double check, don't blindly listen to me, because yours might have a different offset. Anyways, when it comes to hanging the door, I use an even simpler method here. So because I want to align the door with the bottom of that unit, what I can do is I can clamp an offcut to the bottom and then rest the door onto it. That would allow me to mark the position for the pilot holes of the mounting plates, drill the pilot holes, and I can just go ahead and attach my mounting plates. And then once this is done, I can just clip the door and it will be pretty much perfect. However, those hinges have a ability to be adjusted slightly in all directions. And then we get to the fun part here. As I've mentioned earlier in the video, in the beginning, I told you that we're putting a concealed drawer. So because this kitchen unit was for a friend of mine, and that was, I wasn't requested in the specs, by the way. I did that on my own. Because it was for a friend of mine, I thought, what cool thing can I do? And I thought, you know what? Most of the times, space under the cabinets where the kickboard is, it's kind of wasted. It does have its purpose. Normally we run cables there, you can put pipes and all that stuff, but in some cases it's absolutely useless. It's wasted space. And in this case, I knew there was not going to be anything under it, so I thought I'd build a drawer that works on a push-pull slide and hides in the kickboard. So other than the people watching this video, nobody else would know about its existence. So it's exactly what I'm doing here now. So I'm creating a small drawer. It's a simple method that I've shown previously. If not, I would link a video so you can watch how these drawers are made. It's a very simple drawer made out of plywood with pocket hole construction, and then we can attach the whole thing together. As you can see, it's not a very big drawer because it has to go in between the plastic legs, but nevertheless it's still quite useful. Now, what are you going to keep inside? I wouldn't have a clue. What I can tell you is that it has the capacity of about 2 kilograms of flour or casting sugar, or any powdery substance that you may want to wish to keep hidden, for that matter. But in my opinion, it's quite a cool thing to have. And it's probably the best thing about building bespoke cabinets is that we can incorporate things like that, things that are very unusual and you wouldn't get them from the shop. I mean, as well as utilizing the space as efficiently as possible, because you'll see that the space that we had there is not an inch of it is wasted. But as well as that, we can incorporate something funky like that, which you wouldn't get from a shop. So that's my thought on these weird things, because I've built a few of those over the years. So anyways, back to the build. I'm getting off topic. So we built the drawer box, and then after that, as with all of these drawers, what we have to do is we cut the bottom. The bottom just slides from the back. That's why one of the pieces is shorter, so we can do this thing, we slide it, and then just pin it in place. With these things, you can screw it, you can pin it. More than that is absolutely unnecessary. And then with all of the bottoms, I like to leave them slightly proud so I can trim them to size. In this case, it was a tiny bit that I did with a sander. And once this was done, we can go ahead and attach the drawer. So what we're doing here is I've ordered these are push-pull drawer slides, so when you push them it opens, as the name suggests. What we have to do here is we make sure that we use the same offset on left and right. We'll take the bit that goes in the drawer, take it out to the slide, and use a couple of 15mm screws to attach it and make sure that the whole thing works. And after that, I was contemplating a couple of different ways to attach it to the cabinet, and just dawned on me that it's the simplest way we can do that is by using a couple of sides, and then the sides can be attached to the cabinet with pocket holes. So this is exactly what I'm doing here. I'm not going to create a separate box for this unit. Instead, I would cut these two sides, I would mount the runners to them, and I will use the pocket holes that we're drilling now to attach them to the cabinet. And this is exactly what we're doing here now. So we'd have to take the second part of the drawer runner out. This is the part that attaches to the side panel, and we can screw it in place. So we do that by first drawing an offset line, which you saw me do that with a combi square. And this is a very important part of the process here. So when you're doing the calculations, you have to make sure that when you assemble the unit, the level of the drawer has to be beneath the top edge of those side panels. That would allow the drawer to function properly without scraping the cabinet. So if you zoom in here, you can actually see that the drawer sits about 10mm beneath the top edge of those side panels. This is by design. So when you have that offset line, this is the most important thing to do to calculate it properly. And then after that, it's just a case of attaching it to the cabinet. So we have the base unit flipped upside down, and then you can see here it's a case of aligning it and using those pocket holes to attach it to the bottom of the cabinet. So one thing I realized you'd have to be very careful with is you have to have the unit slightly prouder than the legs. So that way when you attach them the kickboard, you would have that little bit of movement to activate the push-pull. Other than that, if you don't do that, your kickboard would hit the legs and you won't be able to use the push-pull to open the drawer. One thing here was that I had to remove that leg to get to that last pocket hole. And with that done, it was pretty much a wrap in the workshop. After that, what we had to do is pack up everything, load it in the van, deliver it on site, and install it, as you can see here. So as promised in the beginning of the video, for those of you who have watched the video to the end, I would let you know what the cost of this project was. So the final price for our customer was about £1,800, and that includes delivery and installation and finishing on site. I would really appreciate if you leave me a comment letting me know whether you think this is expensive, cheap, or reasonably priced. However, I would kindly ask you not to leave the price in the comments. That way I would know anyone who's commented has watched the video to the end. As always, thank you for watching to the end, and I will see you on the next one.